Welcome into Falcons Today by Chat Sports. Matthew Peterson here, going through some surprise cut candidates for the Falcons. Now, before you all become keyboard warriors, there is an element of surprise to this, right? Meaning, I don't think these guys are locks to get cut or anything like that, but we do see surprise cuts every single offseason, and these are 5 names that could be on that list in the future. Now, before we look at our first cut candidates, make sure to subscribe to the channel because the NFL draft is pretty firmly in the rearview mirror at this point, which means we've got some dog days ahead of us, minicamp, OTA, schedule release. But outside of that, we're going to be, clawing our way to training camp. So if you're looking for a Falcons YouTube channel all summer long, hit the sub button down below. Help us reach 21,500 subscribers. First surprise cut candidate is quarterback Taylor Heinicke. Not really sure how big of a surprise this would be, especially after the Falcons drafted Michael Penix and they added a UDFA quarterback, Paddock, from Illinois. But Heinicke took a pay cut to stay with the team, so I think there's some level of assurance on his end that he'll have a roster spot. But in the Chat Sports office today, we were talking about how Michael Penix kind of got the short end of the stick by getting drafted by the Falcons because he has to sit for a few years. And I butted in with Cousins has something to be upset with, Penix has something to be upset with, but Taylor Heinicke is low-key the biggest loser out of the Penix draft pick because he went from being the backup to Kirk Cousins, Alex Moran, hold a clipboard, don't do anything for a couple of months, to oh shit, I got to battle with the UDFA for a roster spot now. So I thought you guys might get a kick out of the meme that I cooked up. But Taylor Heinicke has a $4.5 million cap hit and a $3.3 million dead cap hit, which means there's only a little over $1 million in cap savings if Atlanta were to move on from him after he agreed to a pay cut to stay on the team because the Falcons traded Desmond Ridder away. Last year, filling in and starting at several points in the season, he never showed this fan base and this team a whole lot to believe he could be a starting quarterback in the NFL. Let's just be brutally honest. Completed over a little half of his passes, 890 yards, 5 touchdowns, 4 interceptions. I thought he would take the torch from Ryan Fitzpatrick, given that he was the guy that replaced Ryan Fitzpatrick in Washington. Unfortunately, I don't think Heinicke is on that career path. So he's going to be battling with former Fighting Illini John Paddock, who started 7 games last year. He started off at Ball State, transferred to U of I, put up 1,200 yards, 9 touchdowns, and 3 interceptions. I think Atlanta will want to carry 3 quarterbacks, especially with Kirk Cousins coming off an Achilles injury, which means it is up to Heinicke to not only be better than John Paddock, but to be $1.2 million better than John Paddock because they could save a decent chunk of change by moving on from Heinicke. So he's got to show this front office, not only am I the 3rd best quarterback on this roster, but I'm also so much better than that UDFA you guys added that it doesn't make sense to move on from me because the savings is just not worth the reward of a John Paddock. So will Michael Penix start a game in 2024? I mentioned earlier that we were having a bit of a Chat Sports office debate today about the Penix pick and whatnot because it just refuses to go away. And some people thought, hey, there could be an outside chance of if Cousins has a bad week or two, the leash could be shorter since they just took Michael Penix. So let me know what you think in the comment section. Barring an injury, I don't see a way Kirk Cousins will ever get benched for Michael Penix, especially to start a week. Maybe they yank him late in the 4th quarter. That's happened to a lot of good quarterbacks, but I don't think we'll see Penix start a game because Kirk Cousins is a healthy scratch. All right, next one up is safety Richie Grant. So the former 2nd-round pick out of UCF lost his starting job towards the end of the year to a 7th-round pick out of Alabama last year, DeMarco Hellams, which means Richie Grant finds himself in a bit of a tough spot because there are some cap savings to be had for a guy that's not a starter on this team. But I expect Grant to not only stay on this roster, but I think he's going to have some snaps. I think he's going to have a role on this defense because I think we can look back at Raheem Morris's defenses and have a pretty good idea as to what Richie Grant could be doing. But last year for the Atlanta Falcons, over 100 tackles, 3 of which were tackles for loss, 6 pass breakups, 1 interception. Ultimately, We saw Ryan Nielsen and Arthur Smith make a swap with Grant and Helms towards the end of the season. But I'm not sure if Raheem Morris sees eye to eye with the previous coaching staff. Not long ago, Coach Morris said, I told Richie when I got here that I was wrong on him. I didn't think he was as good as a player as he is. And he's played really well and does some good things, tackles strong. I was in another place, obviously, when I evaluated him. But he's shown me a lot of really good things on tape. So if we look at what could be a window into the 2024 Falcons defense, the Rams defense last year, which is where Morris and Lake come over from, we saw a lot of safeties, 4 to be exact, get over 40% snap count in 2023. So I've got decent reason to believe we're going to see at least 3 safeties have a good amount of usage, which could be Jesse Bates, DeMarco Helms, and Richie Grant. But if Richie Grant has a bad training camp and we see what some of these younger guys kind of show up and show out, similar to Heinicke, they could move on from him for some cap savings. Now, before we get to the rest of our cut candidates today, if you want to get a Michael Penix jersey, go to chatsports.com/Penix. I've already put that link in the comments and description of today's video. But if you want to rep the brand new Atlanta Falcons quarterback for the 2026 season, get yourself a Michael Penix jersey today. That link is in the comments and description of today's video. Moving on to our third cut candidate, it is Lorenzo Carter. Signed a 2-year deal with Atlanta after not having a great start to his career with the Giants, and played pretty well at the start and then not so well lately. Falcons linebacker room. Let's talk about it, because Carter finds himself penciled in as a starter, which is not where he was last year, right? Bud Dupree and Arnold Ebiketie were the 2 starters, but Atlanta has not brought back Bud Dupree, so Carter all of a sudden moves up in the depth chart, and I don't think it's a result of him playing super well last year. 35 tackles, 6 tackles for loss, 3 sacks, 2 fumble recoveries. I think it's simply because he's the next guy in the depth chart, and Atlanta has not brought in a starting level replacement for Bud Dupree through free agency or the draft. Now, Carter has a $4.7 million cap hit for this upcoming season, but just a $1 million dead cap hit. So the Falcons could save $3.7 million by moving on from Lorenzo Carter, which I wouldn't advertise as a great idea because, sure, $3.7 million is like not a ton of money really in the NFL world, but it is some money, and you could always roll that over to next offseason salary cap to save future use of money, but you don't have a ton of depth at that position, right? You drafted Braylon Trice out of Washington in round 3. So if Trice has some incredible training camp in preseason and proves to be a starting caliber player opposite of Arnold Ebiketie, and the Falcons look at Lorenzo Carter like, well, why are we going to have you on the books for this much money? You're not going to even be a starter on this team. Yeah, we'll just roll with Braylon Trice and some younger guys and save ourselves some money in the process. So that would be the path for Carter to be a surprise cut candidate. Fourth one up is Kha'Darel Hodge. I'll be honest with you guys, I'm kind of reaching on these last 2. There's just not a whole lot of great surprise cut candidates, but I did want to hit this segment for you all coming out of the draft. When you look at the wide receiver room for Atlanta, I don't think the Falcons should be thinking about removing names from this list. They should be looking at adding names to this list. But Kha'Darel Hodge, who re-signed on a very cheap $1.2 million contract in the offseason, he'll be competing with younger guys like Casey Washington, rookie out of Illinois, and then some of the practice squad players from last year for one of those coveted wide receiver spots on the 53-man roster. And I think at this point we have a pretty good idea as to who Hodge is as a player. He's an awesome special teamer that can make a few plays every so often in the receiving game, but you should not heavily rely on him. So if Atlanta gets some great production from the bottom of their depth chart in training camp, preseason, OTAs, all that good stuff, maybe they decide, you know what, we brought back Hodge, but ultimately he's not even a top 5, top 6 player at that position on this team. We'll go our separate ways. But let me know, should the Falcons add a wide receiver? Give me a yes, or give me a sign, or give me a pass. I think they absolutely should. You just look at what the Falcons wide receiver room is going to be like, and you could definitely see how with the new offense, they are going to need some depth at that position. Fifth and final cut candidate is punter Bradley Pinion. I told you earlier I was reaching, and this is definitely the biggest reach of all. But let me explain why we're talking about a punter for the first time on Falcons Today. Atlanta did add UDFA punter Ryan Sanborn from Texas following the draft. So I think there's some level of interest from the front office to bring in some competition to the punter room, which up until now is a one-man army. And that's probably very appropriate for all 32 teams. But it's not like Pinion comes off a bad year. You guys ready for some punter stats here? I looked at Bradley Pinion's stats from last year and how they ranked throughout his entire 9-year NFL career. Yards per punt was actually the best year of his NFL career. Now, punter stats can be a little bit deceiving at times because if you're punting from your own 20-yard line every time, you've got a full field to kick through, right? Whereas if you play on a good team with a good offense and their drive stalls out at midfield, you don't have that whole field to kick to. So yards per punt, 47. Net yards per punt was third out of his 9 seasons in the NFL. Touchback and inside the 20 percentage were both middle of the pack. So I don't look at what Bradley Pinion did last year and think they really got to find a replacement. Like the Bears, they drafted a punter because their punter last year, Trenton Gill, was truly bottom 2 in the NFL. That is not the case for Pinion. Now, if you look at the five cut candidates we outlined on today's show, I put together all the potential cap savings for each one, and you'd only get to a total of $10 million. So I'm not looking at any of these guys as, ooh, that's a good way to save a nickel or two. I'm looking at them as they may lose their spot on their roster simply because someone below them on the depth chart comes and steals it. Not because they are dramatically overpaid for what they're being asked to do. Now, give me your cut candidate. I just gave you 5 of mine. Let me know who you think could be on the hot seat going into minicamp, OTAs, and training camp. It needs to come in the tip-top best shape of life season. That way they don't lose their starting spot or just their spot on the roster. That will do it for us on today's show. Thank you so much for tuning in. Hope you have a great rest of your Monday, and we'll catch up later.